Welcome back. In this episode of the Enterprise GTM podcast, we have two serial chief security officers as guests, Rinki Sethi, who was CSO at Twitter, Bill.com, Rubrik, and Lucas Modi, CSO at Alteryx, ex Palo Alto Networks, eBay, and Twitter. They share what's really keeping CSOs up at night and what they wish founders understood. Rinki and Lucas dive deep into the evolving role of the CSO, discuss real enterprise pain points and what separates forgettable found vendors from trusted partners. If you're doing anything in the cybersecurity ecosystem, you don't want to miss this behind the scenes masterclass from two veteran CSOs. Welcome, Rinki and Lucas, to the Enterprise GTM podcast. It is my privilege today to welcome the two of you. Rinki is VP and CSO at Bill.com and Lucas, SVP and CSO at Alteryx. Rinki and Lucas are eminent leaders in cybersecurity, veterans in technology, investors, and an early stage startup founder's best friend. So really excited to have you both here. Rinki, to get started with you, tell us a little bit about yourself. Could you please double click on your career, your role, and the remit of your business at Bill.com?
Yeah, absolutely. Vidya, thanks for having us here. So I've been in cybersecurity for a little over 20 years now. I started my career in cyber at PG&E, worked at Walmart, eBay, Intuit, Palo Alto Networks, did a short stint at IBM before taking my first CISO job at Rubrik, my second one at Twitter.
For folks that may not be super familiar with the different roles that CSOs play across different kinds of organizations, could you maybe unpack that a little bit in terms of what are some of the differences in how you were dealing with security at Rubrik versus Bill versus your startup?
It's been very, very different. And I think one reason it's been so different is that times have changed as well, right? Even when I look at the last 5 to 10 years. When I joined Rubrik as CISO there, I was employee number one in the security org over there as CISO. And so it was really a build from scratch and get Rubrik IPO ready. And it was a great role. And the board was made up mostly of investors. And so they were really plugged into the cybersecurity ecosystem. And so it was really a build from scratch and get us IPO ready, right? And so in a smaller company, I think Rubrik at that time was about 1,500 people or so. Then going from there to Twitter had just faced a very, very public breach. It was rescue them out of the breach. The team was overworked. There was a lot of investment at that point in building out the right security capabilities. But there was also a lot of tension at the time I was there during the last US election and all the crazy things that Twitter was used for in terms of a communications platform like the Capitol attack and so forth. And so there was a lot of what you see on the platform was lived and breathed by the teams internally too. So very different security problems than what Rubrik was facing. And then Bill, which was completely different, is in the fintech space. So very highly regulated space, public company, a lot of scrutiny on cybersecurity from customers and banks. And so again, very different. And then I think the role of the CISO over time has also changed quite a bit in terms of just there's much more attention on it. There's a lot more pressure on what you communicate, what you may not communicate.
Your journey is really fascinating, Rinki. The span of public companies such as Bill and Twitter and everything that happened in between. Very curious to know when you you've switched industries here. So how do you think about your role of protecting the company, the customers, and the assets? Does that change a lot when you move from business to business? Or is there a common thread, a common denominator?
No, I think the fears are similar. Like what you're protecting is very similar. You figure out what is the critical IP, what is the critical asset that you're trying to protect. Of course, customers and your processes, but the context changes, right? And what you might need to be aware of, it changes as well. So like at a social media company, a lot of it has to do with communications and regulations around that. So you're maybe working with different things than at a fintech company where you're looking at PCI and other things. So at the end of the day, the principles are the same, but the context is different.
Yeah. And Lucas, you've had a very, very varied career yourself. So tell us a little bit about your journey, your current role, and if you could also provide our audience a compare and contrast with Rinki's role, that'd be great.
For sure. Thank you, Vidya. So, yes, I am currently the SVP CISO at a company called Alteryx. For your listeners that haven't heard of Alteryx, think of Alteryx as a data analytics company that enables everybody from hardcore data scientists all the way over to like the citizen analyst in various verticals to make good decisions and to automate and build workflows with data. So that's what Alteryx does. I've been here for about 3 years, but I've been in cybersecurity for 25 plus, actually 27, but who's counting, right?
Was it even called cybersecurity back then,
It
Lucas?
wasn't. It was called Nerd Geek, if I recall correctly. Yeah, I've been in cyber for a long time. You'll hear a lot of intersection with Rinky and her career, but Twitter, Rubrik, Palo Alto Networks. At Palo Alto Networks, I happen to have been their very first CISO, so responsible for doing security for the largest independent security company in the world. So it was a lot of fun. It's also chaotic and very stressful. And was there from about $500 million to $3 billion in revenue. So it was a hyper growth phase of that company's existence. Not that they ever really slowed down. But then going back further into it, eBay, PayPal, KPMG, and Oracle. But yeah, I've been very passionate about cyber that entire time. So back to your question. So how has it differed? Rinky and I have had a great deal of intersection. So a lot of what you heard from her is probably going to be echoed with me. What I will say is on the evolution of the CISO role, you pointed out tongue-in-cheekily, but basically, going back to where I started my career, security wasn't really a formal function. Security was more of a necessary evil when things went sideways. Early instantiations of breach and attack were more like services falling over, WTF. Oh, we double click and it looks like somebody with knowledge did some things that they weren't supposed to do. All the way to where we are today, where CISOs can be held liable in the event that, they're negligent in supporting and ensuring that their companies stay protected. So the world has changed quite a bit. And the function of everything in the security vertical has changed to accommodate, right? Early days was a couple of security folks that were just really smart engineers that cared. And today we've got functions like governance, risk management, and compliance. We've got entire teams that do certifications and risk management. We've got organizations that whose sole responsibility is detecting when bad things happen and reacting to them. We've got functions that are meant to be a guardrail for developers, and the list goes on, right? So it certainly is a very mature function these days.
Yeah. And Lucas, curious to know, why do you think this has happened? Like, is it just that software is eating the world, and as much as good people are building software, there are also an equal or increasing number of nefarious people trying to take advantage of that? Is it just that, or is there more to it?
I mean, it is that. I think at the end of the day, as markets are created and as folks participate within those markets and there's economics within those markets, there's going to be those that try to take advantage and try to steal from those markets. And I mean, that's the software game is one of the largest games in the world. And as folks understand that and understand where the holes are, they're going to try to take advantage and monetize it in ways that the system wasn't designed for. So I think it's that. And then, of course, the bad guys, they are better armed today than they were 10, 15 years ago, right? We've democratized the access to all these phenomenal tools. I think about the questions that I can ask to ChatGPT today. It would take me days, weeks, months to get answers for 5 years ago. And so, the more you arm folks that are less scrupulous, the more we're going to have to deal with the things that we're dealing with today.
That's a great point you make about democratization. It works not only for the good people, for the bad people as well.
100%.
Rinky, so to switch topics, in security, do you consider there to be anything that is super foundational, but not adequately addressed by many enterprises today? And granted, this is a very broad and generic question, but I thought I'd ask the two of you this, given the spectrum of, industries that you get to see, the spectrum of companies that you get to see.
Yeah, maybe and Vidya, I think you, Lucas, and I have had many conversations on this in the past. So maybe I'll talk about one that we're passionate about is around identity and access management. I think we've talked years and years around how foundational that is to zero trust and everything that we want to implement as security practitioners. I can't think of a company that I've been at so far where that hasn't been one of the focus areas, and it takes years to get it right. And I'm talking about the entire spectrum of identity and access management. And it's extremely complex to solve for. You're thinking about legacy systems and infrastructure that you might have, and then more modern infrastructure, and all technologies don't work in the same way. And so you have proliferation of identities everywhere that are hard to manage. And then, of course, like you have shadow IT people. And now that's even more, I think, with AI, that shadow IT is a bigger problem. And how do you kind of have visibility over everything to then ensure that you have the right access controls and so forth? So I think that's still a fundamental challenge.
Yeah, I certainly recall some of our fascinating conversations on this topic, Rinki. Thank you for sharing that. I guess a follow up to you, Rinki, is so if we put aside all the amazing tool vendors that are, the up and comers, the established ones that are promising us magical solutions for IAM, what are some other operational issues that you as a CSO and your teams have to deal with that makes this such a protracted multi-year process, if you will, to get it right?
Yeah, I think because we've talked about centralized governance and how to have zero trust principles and so forth. And having a proper IAM program means that you might have centralized systems, you have to have strong policies, you have to define rules, you have to make sure that you have least privilege and so on and so forth. And then you need automation and continuous monitoring. And then you need to train your workforce as well on provisioning and deprovisioning. And so there's a lot to it to get it right. There's an entire spectrum, right? And even putting vendors aside, there's not one solution that solves for all of this. And that makes it incredibly complex that you need one thing for privileged access management, another tool for human identities, another tool for non-human identities. And all of a sudden you might have 10 tools just to solve for identity and access management. And then of course, there's kind of a maturity curve too, right? As a business starts early, you're thinking about making revenue and building up the business. And then later you start putting these security tools in place and start really looking at your strategy around identity and access management. And already that mess kind of exists that you need to clean up. And so there's kind of a maturity that goes along with it as well.
Yeah. There's legacy baggage, and then there's the new stuff that people want enabled with. This is certainly a complicated problem. One other related topic I wanted to ask you about related to identity and access management, Rinki, that you just mentioned. So when it comes to policies, as a CSO, obviously you get to say what your employees can and cannot do. How effective do you think it is in making sure that people don't do stupid stuff, especially when it comes to identities? Like, you shall not have too many service accounts, as an example. It doesn't really happen, but when you think about like setting up a policy and then enforcing those policies, what are some considerations you have as a CSO? And then I'm asking this question because I'm also wondering what implications would that have for a vendor who has a very policy-based approach?
Yeah, you have to have policies in place for guidance and kind of structure, but that alone, as we know, is not enough. And so I think the more, and this is kind of where I know we're going to be talking about AI later, but this is where I think a lot of identity solutions are really interesting that are in the market today. But I think like having the automations around enforcement, you have to have enforcement. In order to have enforcement, you need to have some kind of visibility. It can't just be policy driven. And so you have to be able to enforce. And then I think this is where the chaos happens for security teams, that now you have all this visibility and all these things you need to do. Can we start auto remediating some of the issues and maybe even putting more control in the user's hands so they can decide whether, hey, I don't need this access anymore, or I don't need this service account. So there's a lot that can be done there. But again, as I mentioned earlier, it's like a mess of tools right now. And it's just chaos for teams to manage. And especially if you have a small security team, you can't just bring on so many tools to go fix this problem.
That all makes a lot of sense. And that's a super beefy problem for lots of enterprises. Lucas, same question for you. What do you consider as foundational but not adequately addressed at enterprises?
I would have had Rinki not answered first with identity. I would have chosen identity as well. So in the spirit of giving you a little bit more to work with, I'm going to shift. Although I will add on and say, identity's an interesting one. It's like, I'm going to bring up vuln management. Vuln management and identity are both these evergreen topics within security. Because the world around us evolves at the pace of our tools and technology, it's like one of those games where we're never really totally going to be caught up. And so therefore, by definition, what your question is like, they're foundational, and yet they're not adequately addressed. I don't know that they ever will be. And I think that's kind of the magic and the spirit of why cybersecurity is such a massive and growing TAM, if you will. With that as a backdrop, vulnerability management is another one that plagues us as security practitioners and security executives. because, we've got such a massive, if you think about the way that companies are or how different companies are today than they were 10 years ago, we joked a decade back, like, it doesn't matter what you do and what industry vertical you in, everybody's a data company. And now more modern companies say in the last 3-4 years, it doesn't matter what you do. You can be selling and manufacturing widgets, but you're also an AI company. And as a result, our footprints are growing, where we're deployed is growing. We're all cloud companies now. We're all data companies now. We're all AI companies now. We've got infrastructure that straddles hybrid, multi-hyperscaler clouds and all the rest of it. We're just these huge, massive companies, regardless of how many employees we have. So our attack surface is growing. And as a result, the number of vulnerabilities and potential exposures within our business is growing. And that complicates things when it comes to figuring out incrementally where I need to spend my time. And so vulnerability management is another one of those evergreen categories that we love solving for, but we never fully feel is done. And so I'm really excited about technologies that allow us to get to like order of magnitude better outcomes, because it kind of helps us to keep up with the pace of change. And so I think that's another category that is foundational, but never adequately addressed.
Never adequately addressed. And I think you also said we may never address everything.
We're always going to be playing catch up. And I think
yes,
at least we can kind of, try to put the pedal to the metal, leverage technology in ways that help us to build some acceleration against those ends. But yes, I don't think we'll ever fully satisfy the hearts and minds of security folk.
Lucas, you know what I found very fascinating about your response? If you were any other typical CSO, you may be like, oh my goodness, this vulnerability stuff, we can never get on top of it. But you took a glass half full approach and you said it's massive TAM, spoken like a true investor. So I just wanted to call you out on that. And Lucas, pulling that thread of what you as a CSO could focus your attention on, because obviously, like you said, there's always too much going on. You cannot really completely have everything under control. At the same time, vendors know that you as a CSO will only attend to priorities that you've identified as maybe top 2 or top 3 any given year. So for the benefit of those founders out there who are trying to understand how to do business with Lucas or how to do business with any CSO for that matter, could you maybe help us understand how you think about, how do you come to your top 2 priorities and how often does that change? Is it based on proactive initiatives you identified as an org? Or is it based on shifting business needs during the course of a year? Like, could you please unpack how you've done this in the past and if things are changing in terms of how you evaluate your priorities, all of that, if you could help us understand.
Yeah, for sure. I'll do my best. So I think one, because I can answer this from 2 lenses, as you pointed out, I look at the world through 2 lenses. One is a practitioner and one that's trying to solve for security, but also 2, I also want to take some bets in companies that I think, or that Rinky and I think are going to be kind of the next big giant company to solve for security in the future. But I'm going to look at this purely from the CISO hat, so purely from the practitioner hat. When I'm talking with a founder, somebody that's identified a path that they believe is a new way to solve an old problem, I love that. That's great. And I do want to chat with them about it. But it's not helpful when they're only caught up in the shiny thing that they believe is going to be really exciting and really fun, if it's not aligned to the things that I need to either go and solve for or that I have as a problem in my ecosystem. It's part of my strategy, right? I'll give you an analog. It's like, give me a shiny new kind of device that has the computer vision recognition of weeds and can use a laser to kill the weeds and really help me to create an amazing garden. And if I don't have a garden, what point is it to tell me about this new device? I don't care. I don't give a shit. I don't have a garden. So it's like that. So like really understand me and my ecosystem first and come at it from the standpoint of helping me to solve for the things that are plaguing me in my job on a day-to-day, making my job easier. And sometimes the tech doesn't align with that. That's okay. What you're doing now is you're building muscle memory recognition, the fact that when you're ready for the thing that I'm bringing to the table, maybe that's some point in the future, but you're helping me to understand how I might be able to help you solve for something that might be important to you next year or the year that follows. And so I think recognition of the things that are important to me really helped me to believe that, whoever this founder is, they really care about my outcomes and objectives. And that's really meaningful to me because I think as a practitioner, I like doing business with those that are invested in my outcomes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense. founders who've done their homework essentially understand what matters in your business, what is there in your technical stack, what your key problems are. Looks like all those things matter to you. Makes a lot of sense. And then what are some questions that you wish founders would ask you about your business before trying to sell their latest and greatest stuff?
It's questions, but it's also homework, right?
Mm-hmm.
So walk into a conversation with me understanding the business that I'm in. Understand, like if you're selling me a product for companies that have massive cloud deployments and I have zero footprint in cloud and you haven't done your homework, you should know that. Little things like that. I think it's walk into a conversation aware. I certainly do that on the flip, right? I mean, we're here having this conversation with you around tech, AI, investment, cyber, but you walked into this with some knowledge of Rinky and I's background and all the rest of that stuff. And I think that's what builds relationships and makes it relational rather than transactional. And so I think hopefully that makes sense, but those are the important things to me.
Absolutely. And Rinky, switching topics here to you, I was listening to one of your recent podcasts, and you talked about how important it is for CISOs to be able to communicate cybersecurity risks and initiatives that you want to propose to your board. Could you maybe talk to us a little bit about why you think that is important? And could you also give us some additional insights about how that factors into unlocking budgets or resources for your company when you're proposing cybersecurity programs?
Yeah, definitely. And so I'll split that into two. Let's talk about communications just around risk, both to executive team and the board. I remember when we started in InfoSec, right? It was like, if an incident or a risk didn't bubble up to executive level, then you were doing your job really well. You didn't want it to become chaos or an issue. And that's like completely flipped now, right? It's our jobs as CISOs is not to hold risks just very close to our chest. In fact, it's to ensure that those that are accountable understand the risks, that they understand that they're accountable, and that we're communicating that effectively across the board, and that you're making then decisions based on the people that matter and that own those risks. And our job is now very much to educate those on these are the risks that exist and the impact that that could have, and then jointly make a decision around whether you want to accept that risk, mitigate that risk, whatever you're going to do around it. And a lot of times you may decide to escalate, and you are escalating together so that you can go and figure out what the right solution is. I think similarly with the board, and Lucas and I talk to new CISOs all the time around, like, how do you communicate to the board? How do I get through? I think there's a lot of things that are effective. One, I think you need to understand the level of education that board members have around cybersecurity, and then level set with them. Then also make sure like you have relationships on what do they want to hear about and what do you think is important for them to hear about. When you're going to the board, of course, bringing them up to speed on what are the risks at the company, how you're tracking them, and what it looks like over time. And as new risks emerge, that you're bringing education to the board level as well. And then, of course, talking about incidents that matter and what you did to make sure that those incidents were contained and how you're improving your tech and processes over time to make sure that those don't happen again, and bringing transparency around all of that. And then, of course, doing it at a level where the board can engage. And I think most importantly is you want to like have conversations with the board in the boardroom around cybersecurity. It shouldn't just be this one directional presentation. And in order to do that, you have to bring the right data and things like that to the board to then have that engaging conversation. I think there's this misconception that CISOs go and ask boards for budgets. And I can assure you that's a very bad idea. That is not the place you want to do that. I think you want to have alignment on what you're going to present to the board prior to the board meetings. You want to make sure that there's conversations around budget with the executive team, and you're making those business cases with the exec team, not at the board level. Boards don't grant security teams budget. And if you do that, you'll probably start creating bad relationships with your executive team pretty quickly. So there's a process to do that. And it's really, again, showcasing, bringing data to the table around this is why we need the budget. These are the risks that we need to try to handle. And again, it's a trade-off discussion because you might be told no around budget and then it's like, okay, who's going to be accountable for the risk that exists then? So, and of course that it's our job to raise awareness on what might be needed and the risks that are there. Yet the first time teams should not be hearing about budget requests at a board meeting.
Yeah, this is super enlightening, Rinky. Think a few things that you mentioned that I paid close attention to a few times here are awareness and having an ongoing conversation as opposed to doing presentations. So it sounds like a lot of it is ongoing awareness. It's not a one-off, oh, we have this big bad stuff that is happening or happened, so that people are constantly aware of the importance of the work that your team is doing, so that if and when there is a budget unlock required or new resources that are needed to be deployed for something, it doesn't come as a surprise that, oh, our security team is doing important work. So it sounds like education, ongoing awareness is mandatory role of what a CSO has to be doing, both with their executive team as well as with the board.
Yeah, that's 100% right. You want folks coming to you and saying like, okay, I understand I own this risk. What do we need to do to fix it? Right? Because I don't want this. And then then you start talking about budget and what might be needed.
Yep. And Rinki, you speak to a number of vendors in your role also as both as an investor as well as an executive, security executive. I'm sure you come across vendors who sometimes, seem to leverage this FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt around risks in particular in the cybersecurity space. How do you recommend that founders actually leverage this and try and build a business case for why their product should matter to you? Is leveraging that FUD the right thing to do, or do you have a different recommendation?
I don't think it is. And I think, it was funny. I had gotten an email from a vendor that sent me that I had some kind of vulnerability on my site or something. There was some kind of issue. And I couldn't figure out if it was real or not. So it did worry me a little bit, right? I think I ran it by Lucas. I ran it by a couple people, like, is this real or not? And it turns out to not be a big deal. It's kind of a known thing. And it actually really annoyed me. It wasted my time, right? And so I don't think that's the right way to do it. Don't try to put scare tactics and things like that. But I think what could be useful is if there's a vulnerability or an issue that is actually a really scary thing that's happening. And we've seen some of those recently even. I think vendors stepping in and making their customers aware, or even potential folks that, hey, I'm not sure if your environment is impacted, but this is going on. Let me know how we can help you if it is, right? So if it is something that's impacting you, I think that can really be helpful and work. And sometimes if a vendor is the first to raise an issue like that, they can be seen as a thought leader or like someone very innovative in the space. So I think there's good ways to do it and bad ways to do it. Not go and send, hey, you have an issue that's you probably need fixed, engage us to help you fix it. That's not necessarily the right way to do it.
Yep. So the tone of how that message is delivered, even if there is something material that may be requiring your attention, the tone really matters. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. Lucas, switching to you. So you've seen very many different technology waves in your long security career. There's cloud, mobile, now AI, like you said. Oh, you also mentioned data. So let's go back in time with especially some of the prior technology shifts that you were in the middle of, and maybe let's pick cloud. And especially before cloud became mainstream, there was a lot of apprehension about workloads moving to the cloud, people using SaaS applications. Of course, we coined the term shadow IT and whatnot. So knowing what you now know about what happened to cloud and SaaS adoption with employees in particular, how do you think that colors your approach as to how to approach AI, and particularly GenAI? What are some lessons learned, and how are you leveraging those lessons in this new wave?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, but I'm going to start by saying that you're trying to make me sound really old by saying I'm here for all of the epic.
Weren't you 15 years old?
Cards. You should have brought up cards and said I was there for that too.
Well, I thought you were 15 years old when you started your career.
Well played. So, it's a great point, because I like to bring up this example too, right? The adoption of mobile to the birth of cloud compute, and what that meant for us, and leverage kind of the winners and losers examples of that time. Because there were a lot of companies that were very apprehensive on the adoption of cloud, and they thought it was like very risky, and they wanted to risk manage everything. They wanted to slow everything down and slow things down to a trickle so that they can manage every single incremental risk. And those companies, we don't have to name any names, but a lot of those companies that were reluctant to identify this as the next technological wave and were reluctant to hop on board ended up having to play catch up for a long time. There's still companies with cloud mandates today. And the reason those cloud mandates exist is because they're still playing catch up. And so how do we manage risk in a way where we enable our workforce and don't lose ground to our competitors, but do so thoughtfully and in a managed way without getting too much in the way of the business? So I think learning from the past is really important. And we've got a lot of great examples because technology is moving so quickly. A lot of us have multi-generational, as you pointed out, because I've been here since the punch cards. I've seen it many times. And so when I think about like having to manage risk here, it's very much a first recognize the importance of this technological wave. I think somebody else said it way more eloquently than I, and now it's kind of a cliche, but it's AI is not going to take my job, but somebody who's good at using it will. Well, that doesn't apply just to the individual level. It applies to how companies operate today. Companies that find ways to gain efficiencies and to enable their workforces with responsible adoption of AI, they're going to kill everybody else. That's why we're all excited about going back to the venture capital angle. We're really excited about vintage 25, vintage 26 companies that are AI native, solving for old problems in new ways, right? We want to make sure that we're pitching our wagons to these companies that are going to take advantage of the order of magnitude better outcomes that they get to by leveraging AI as part of their business plan. So anyhow, that's the way I like to think about it. That's the way I like to frame it to my teams when we jump straight into hardcore risk management as security folks, because as security folks, we have this tendency to do that, right? We think that our job is to manage every friggin' risk. That is not our job. Our job is to recognize, Rinky pointed out when she's talking about her conversation with the board, it's not telling the board all the things that we stopped. It's helping everybody in the business who has a different lens on how the business should operate, helping them understand what the risks are so that we can collectively come together and make good, smart decisions on what to enable, what to stop, and what to kind of allow to go, but at maybe a slightly slower pace so we can kind of see what the outcomes are. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds like a very difficult job to me, just based on what I've been hearing from the beginning. The surface of what you have to protect as a CISO, it's only expanding, right? And then the number of different bad actors and what they're able to do because of the democratization of technology, that's only increasing. And at the same time, people are very, very hungry to embrace the latest and greatest technologies, particularly so with AI. So I guess at the risk of maybe getting into the weeds here, perhaps, would it be possible, Lucas, to like maybe pick a technology or two, then talk about like how did you go about deciding, okay, the stuff, it's not entirely clear what's going to happen, but then my employees are craving for it or my customers need it because our competitors have this feature that is using AI. Like, is it possible to like anchor on a specific example here from recent times?
I think I can, and I don't want to risk talking about things that are specific to my business. So I'm going to right-click, zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
And it's very much the question that you just asked, which is around the responsible adoption of AI. If you think about it, most of us adopted or starting using like ChatGPT as an example as kind of the killer app that brought us into this new epic as individuals before we used it as employees. Yep. And there's a reason for that. Most employers or most companies were like, it's cool stuff. What are the implications for me and my business, right? What are the implications for how these models might train on data that my employees provide as part of a prompt with good intent and all this stuff? And so how do we do that? And so a lot of us started ideating on, okay, well, what are the controls that we put into place for this? Do we just say we don't want to use this stuff internally, or is that going to hamstring our business? Back to the point that I was making earlier, right? And so then we start thinking about, well, we solve by analogy. How have we solved for things like this in the past? And technologies start to be born from this, right? How do we shim like enterprise transactions with GPT or LLMs in a way that we kind of guardrail against the exposure of company secrets and things like that, but enable the workforce to leverage these tools because it's going to make them more productive for our business. And over time, we start to realize how we can address this contractually, how we can deploy models on our own internally so that our prompts aren't leaving, how we can kind of dehydrate and rehydrate prompts at the right point in those transactions so that we're not exposing anything. I mean, then all these questions start to come out, and then we start to realize that we can probably do this in a way that we can truly enable our workforce without creating too much risk. We're not going to reduce that risk to zero, because if we wanted to do that, no company would ever exist. And once again, it's about finding that right balance. And a lot of that's going to depend upon the vertical that you're in, the industry that you're in, how regulated it is, and all these other things. But unless we start having those conversations, I don't think we're ever going to progress. So, I mean, that's how, I right-click, zoom out without getting into specifics on what my company, and I've gone through as, the CISO of my company. I've heard this anecdotally across the board. And I think, a lot of companies now are feeling much more comfortable around their adoption of Gen AI as a workforce enabler.
Fair enough, Lucas. And it sounds like a big part of really figuring out what to do is to actually start kicking the tires with the different technologies that are out there and then start exploring the solution domain as well. That makes a lot of sense. And Rinky, same question to you. You've been through very interesting industries and technology waves yourself. How are you approaching AI and Gen AI, and what lessons from the past are you applying?
Yeah, it's interesting because we went through cloud transformation, mobile transformation, but this feels very different than either one of those. One, I think it's moving a lot faster than those did, right? We still hear about folks that are moving to cloud from on-prem and like how long those transformations can take. But the AI transformation, even I think when Lucas and I started investing in some of the early AI security companies, even just a year ago, how far they've come, and like even new companies that are emerging, it's like very fast moving. And you can literally see that we need to get our teams prepared and make sure that they're upskilled and that we're ready for what's about to come. Because I think the productivity gains and just like what I think how disruptive in a good way that these new innovation are going to be for our teams and the companies that we work for, it's unreal how fast it's moving. And so it's time to start upskilling and thinking about what this new world will look like. And it feels so different than how cloud and how mobile and all of that was. I mean, I think there was new things to learn when those transformations happen, but this is going to be extremely disruptive. And I think that we talk to security leaders that are like, oh, it still feels far away and we're going to wait and see and maybe follow what other companies are doing. My attitude is we've got to be on top of this and really start adopting and embracing it in this new world we're going to be in. And it's like really, really, you can just see it around the corner.
Well, it's very interesting, your comments on AI in particular, Rinky, but I'm pretty sure it's born out of the fact that you both are working on the bleeding edge of technology. You are enabling some of the best teams, right? And you have visibility into all these vendors who are building solutions for some of the problems that maybe are not yet there today, not in the mainstream, but are going to be there like maybe just a few months from now, not even years from now. I think your comments should be pretty instructive for some of those other CSOs that you are referring to who think that they don't have to worry about it. That's super helpful. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so we are nearing the end of this amazing conversation. And this last question that I want to ask the two of you, starting with you, Rinky, is the following. So you're both investors in several early stage startups, and I'm sure that there are new companies pitching to you every other day. I'm pretty sure you're noticing something that which I as an investor have also seen, which is that in cybersecurity in particular, there are way too many Me Too products and then marketing between these different products, whether it be from a growth stage company or an early stage company, which are often identical. It really is dumbfounding to me how to peel differentiation without actually starting to use some of these products. So, question I have for you from your vantage point as both a CSO and an investor, Rinky, what do you think makes some founders in cybersecurity companies stand out more than others? And I ask this question in a way that hopefully founders can walk away with some pointers as to how they could win your trust and attention.
Yeah, I think that we're very founder, like we have a lot of founder conviction. And then when we believe in the founders, it doesn't matter what they're solving for, we're behind them. I think there's founders that really fall in love with the solution that they're building. And then there's founders that really fall in love with the problem, or they just want to go and find the problem and like build. And so you see these pivots that happen. I think the curiosity and the just really wanting to fall in love with the problem that so that they can solve it in the right way. I think for me, that's when you gain trust. So it's like, especially when I think about it as a CISO investor, I want to talk to them, even if I may not have the problem in my environment. I want to see, are they curious and are they intriguing me to learn more about this? And when they can get me passionate about it, that's, I think, founders I want to follow and track. And then as a CISO that's buying, I want to really know that they understand the problem space. They understand what challenges I might be facing. There's not all these assumptions that are already being made. But you're right. There's a lot of amazing founders out there. They're like, a lot of them are competing in the same space. It's even challenging from an investor or a CISO perspective because they're so similar and they're all amazing. But I think like the founders that are really curious, understand on how do you build relationships, because at the end of the day, you want to partner with those vendors that you know are going to grow with you, that they're going to be there when you have an incident or whatever it might be. So you want to make sure there's a great level of trust there as well.
Thank you for sharing that, Rinki. Lucas, what about you? Are there other attributes, similar attributes you're looking for in vendors?
I think Rinki did a great job. Where we like to generally invest in startups is very early stage, pre-seed, seed. And at that stage, ideas are a dime a dozen. Ability to execute is kind of what we're trying to orient our time and attention around. And so, it's like, as Rinki points out, somebody that falls in love, or a team that falls in love with a problem, is really key to identify early on. And then some of the other characteristics that I think about are like having vision and confidence. Like when you finally do land on the idea, love it, and don't allow for sentiment to kick you off your perch, but allow for data and results to kick you off your perch. In other words, don't grasp onto your solution so tight that actual real world reaction won't allow for you to be maybe kicked off your perch and maybe make a pivot. I think those are the kinds of things that we like to identify and look for. And then, of course, folks, it's not always easy to identify, but we do want to identify those that have a bias for action, right? That quickly translate an idea into some sort of on-the-ground action, and then measure those results and see how that, does it look and feel right? Is it getting to this outcome or this result that I'm looking for? Is it getting folks excited? Is it inspiring folks? Does it get a group of talent to want to help me solve this problem with me, and all those things, right? So those are at least a couple of the characteristics that we look for.
All of these completely resonate with me too, Lucas and Rinki, as an early stage investor. And in particular, both of you mentioned the attachment to problem, less solution. I mean, this is so important, right? Especially in the pre-seed and seed stages. That's basically what founders really need to focus on, which is really understanding the problem extremely well. And then the customers, the market should inform the solution. So that makes completely sense. This was such an enlightening conversation. Lucas and Rinki, really, really wonderful time here together. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Vidya. It was a pleasure getting the time with you today. I always enjoy chatting with you.
Yeah, really fun conversation. Thanks, Vidya.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Enterprise GTM podcast. Subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on your favorite podcast platform so we can continue to help enterprise founders thrive.